Good evening, everyone, and welcome to the COW budget meeting of the Ottawa-Carleton District School Board on June 10th, 2025. I would like to call our meeting to order, acknowledging that this meeting is taking place on unceded Algonquin homelands. I would like to acknowledge and thank the Algonquin nations for their stewardship of these lands since time immemorial. Do we have a mover for approval of the agenda? Trustee Nash? Does anyone have any changes or additions to the agenda? Seeing none, all those in favor? In accordance with Municipal Conflict of Interest Act, does any board member have an interest to declare? Seeing none, I would now like to move to the approval of the, moving on to item 5, delegations. There are no delegations this evening. And moving on to item 6, matter for action. I now call upon Director Pafoni to introduce report 25-038, 2025-2026 staff recommended budget.
Thank you. Through you, Madam Chair. Good evening, everyone. Just want to turn this over to our Associate Director, Randy Gerwal, and express my thanks to him and his team in finance, as this has been an incredibly tight turnaround for the financial statements, both the funds and grants that have come forward from the provincial government through to the reports this evening that get the work well underway for us as an organization. So my thanks to Randy and his team.
Through you, Chair. Before I start, I think I'd like to thank my team. This has probably been this has undoubtedly been the shortest turnaround time between a technical paper drop and recommended budget presentation that we've ever done, and probably the history of the OCDSB. On top of that, we had a loss of our general manager of finance. So we had a new general manager of finance come out of retirement and help support us. On top of that, we were dealing with the investigation going on with the province. And the target date to have this done was Friday, but it just wasn't possible with the limitations that we had, the timelines. So I will apologize that you didn't get the documents late in advance, but I did forewarn that that would probably be the case. I wish, actually, if I had my time back, I probably would have delayed this meeting and pushed it to the right by a week, because I think I put a tremendous amount of strain and pressure on my team to try to get this to you tonight, and I wish I hadn't done that, but this is where we're at. So the first slide is the slide I had showed you before about the landscape funding pressures. I didn't update this slide, but it hasn't changed significantly. For example, portable moves went from 2 million to 1.9. And so if I go into the technical papers, we can recalculate what the replacement costs are, but the majority of the funding that we received, we didn't get any new money for anything significant. So all these pressures are still part of why we're under such financial strain within the organization. The financial sustainability plan that I talked about last time, so this is what you're going to see in the budget today. This is part of trying to bring administrative positions closer in alignment with funding, bringing programs closer in alignment with funding, some start of canceling, remodeling of programs, phase 1 of trying to bring some parts of our programs more in line with the funding that we receive from the ministry. So just before we start as well, I talked about the pressures of underfunding, but these are some of the pressures that we had to deal with in this particular budget alone. WSIB increased this year in 24-25 that we had to factor into this budget. It's not something we can ignore. Staff replacement costs, again, a new pressure we had budgeted in 24-25, but the costs are exceeding in the budget, so we had to add a little more to the budget. Some of the B and LT operating costs that were overspending, so we had to do a bit of funding alignment there. Facilities, utility costs, it's not something that we can change or ignore. and just some minor general operating costs. So these are some of the additional pressures that we had to deal with in the development of this budget. Some of the staff recommended reductions, as I talked about, we did, in this budget, you're going to see special education reductions in the tune of $4.9 million. You're going to see some administration reductions in the tune of $5.979 million. Instruction reduction, $4.22 million. And then there's an in-year provision in this budget where we're still making staff adjustments in some areas, and that will take more than a year to do. It's a phased-in approach. And so we're anticipating with the process that we used in the last 2 years where we just, I wouldn't want to call it a hiring freeze, but just really scrutinizing which positions that do become vacant through attrition that we replace or we don't replace, and the general slowdown of expenditures that we can in year save about $3 million. And that's been historically proven. So I'm going to present the board recommended budget financial summary. Here's the table of contents, very similar to previous years. The comparative budget summary. And basically what this statement will do is it shows that we're presenting a balanced budget this evening. It shows the revenues of $1.244 billion and expenses of $1.244 billion. And that was no small feat. A lot of hard work by the team, a lot of modeling and adjustments behind the scene in certain types of expenses. But the reality is there was no significant new money in the budget, and we didn't get significant change in enrollment. So to balance this budget, it did require some of the reductions that you saw on the last slide. So core education funding revenues, this shows the breakdown of the changes. I'm not going to go through these changes, but they are detailed out in the categories by the ministry and how we receive the funding. The one thing I will point out is you'll see in 23-24 a huge jump in actuals, and that's really related to the Bill 124 and the collective agreement pay raises that went through in that year. So that's why you see such a significant jump in the actuals of 23-24, and they don't really align with the 24-25 approved budget, and that's the reason for that. So you'll see that in some of the numbers when you're going through, like why did it go up and then down and then up, but it really is an abnormal year from an expense perspective and a revenue perspective. So you can see school facilities funds. We did get some new funding there, and we did get some new funding across the board. Transportation steps out is a little bit different in the sense that that's not as wage related as some of the other revenues increases, and that is an actual increase in the transportation allocation. It did bring our OC Transpo rate from $99 to $104. The actual rate for OC Transpo is $135, but the ministry has committed to bridging that gap at the revised estimates. So we factor that in there, but I just want to make it known that that in this revenue reflection, it's at the 104, and then you'll see an accrual offsetting revenue and expense that we anticipate. So the total core education funding is $1.074 billion. Then we have other types of revenue that we receive, and that totals about $78 million. And then we have some capital revenues, and that's where the total, didn't keep up with my clicking. And that's where the total revenues of $1.244 billion come from. And then the use of the accumulated surplus related to some capital projects and how we have to amortize that. So changes in operating expenses. So although we did see a significant increase in revenues, the majority of that is tied up in an increase in reciprocal expenses, $73 million and 0.8 in expenses related to salaries and benefits. And then you'll see some mid-year staffing changes, but a lot of those mid-year staffing changes are revenue driven, meaning the continuing education, the Rideau Hub coordinator, those are based on revenues that we're going to increase revenue. So it wasn't FTE growth that's borne by the board. It does have the reciprocal revenue to offset it. And then, but some of the other ones, like the legal counselor, the GM of labor relations, had to do with a restructuring of that part of the organization. But then we also had offsetting print shop and human rights investigators. So we just basically changed the makeup and used some of the surplus positions to offset the changes in the names and the titles and the responsibilities. And that happened in 24-25, just being reflected. It happened at revised estimates, but it had to be reflected in this budget. And then continuing on with some of the changes in operating expenses, you'll see non-discretionary is usually enrollment-based changes, and then discretionary is more of the decisions that the board made to reduce our expenses. That was part of what I showed in the earlier slide of the $17 million, or sorry, $18.1 million in reductions. And I'm not going to go in, but this is where we detail out some of the LSS reductions in specific positions. And these are some of the accounting changes in the background that have to happen related to amortization. There is the OSTA piece that I mentioned to you that we have it as an expense, but we also have the revenue booked as well that we anticipate to get from the ministry. Some minor changes in insurance premiums and lease agreements that we have no control over. And then some of the funding changes in programs. So when we receive funding for fenced items like the Indigenous program or certain envelopes, then we increase the expense and operating budget to make sure that it's just offsetting. So it is an increase in expenses, but there's a reciprocal increase in revenues for those line items, or a decrease in revenues in some cases like OCNet and SIA. And these are some of the recommended operating initiatives that I talked about earlier, where there's the summer learning program for spec ed. That's a specific interest to this table, so I'm pointing that one out specifically. Facilities, utility costs, as I mentioned. So this is some of the pressures and some of the specific reductions that we're recommending. And this is a key table for you guys because it shows where our revenues exceed our expenses and what portions of the program are subsidizing other portions of the program. So when you look at instruction right now, there is a surplus in instruction that is subsidizing special education and our facilities, right? And so I think that's the two main underfunded envelopes within our right now within the budget, and this is where the offsetting surpluses are to compensate for that. The other ones are relatively small, and some of them were ones that we brought down with some of the recommended reductions. This is all part of aligning as best as we can our revenues with our expenses. And then I'm not going to go into detail on the charts or the graph that shows the breakdown of percentages overall in our expenditures. And our capital budget, pretty, as you've seen in the past, we will present at a later time a school renewal and a facilities plan to you guys to approve. And for 25-26, we'll continue on with the plan that you approved last year because it's a 2-year plan, a rolling plan. This slide talks about our enrollment. So as you can see, our enrollment estimates are pretty much in line, a little bit below what our 24-25 estimates were, but more in line with what our 24-25 actuals were. And here's a chart on the average daily enrollment. And here's a breakdown of staffing by FTE summary table. So the different categories within the school board. And again, a chart showing those. And then specific information about LSS and the extended day program. And I will open up to questions.
Thank you for your presentation, Associate Director Giroir, and thank you to your team as well. I now call for a mover for the recommendation in the report. Trustee Lee, would you like an introduction? I will now start a speakers list. Any trustee like to ask questions? Trustee Bell, go ahead, please.
Good evening. Can you hear me?
Yes, we can.
Okay, great. That's great. Thank you very much for presenting this budget at rapid speed. I have to be honest, I didn't get time to delve into it as much as I would have liked to before this meeting. And that was pretty quick. And so I jotted down a couple of thoughts that I had while you were speaking. And I'm hopeful that you can maybe begin to address them tonight, but maybe in another evening, we can have a bit more of an in-depth outlining of, for example, the reductions that you've made this year. I noted a couple of them down. I'm wondering what reductions that have been made will impact our strategic plan. In particular, as you can imagine, I think I ask this every year, how will this impact our efforts towards equity and achieving equity? So that's the overarching question that I hope, and I don't know if you can answer that completely, but I would really appreciate that if someone within the board could answer that question. But I think I heard you say that the human rights investigator position was not filled.
That was one of the positions. Yeah. It was repurposed to another investigator position, to a legal counsel position. So the work will still happen and just in a different format.
Oh, okay. So that's the type of information that I'm looking for, because I know that a human rights investigator, from what I understood from previous year's budgets, that was a direct had a direct line to our efforts when it comes to creating equity, right?
Right.
And so to get an understanding of what sorts of cuts have happened and how that will affect the agenda would be really helpful for me. And then also the last one is special education SEA, close to 5 million. What was that line?
Through you, Chair. So first, I'll start with your first question about the strategic plan. All the work in the strategic plan will continue to happen. There is no doubt that when you cut central staff and central resources, that the pace of that work might change. For example, we did take some of the equity coaches and embed them with the program services coaches, with the intent that they would bring both an equity lens and an academic support lens while working as part of the program services and coaching of our teachers and educators throughout the system. So there was an overall reduction of coaches, but the skill sets and the lenses and the work that those coaches do will not change. It'll just be, in fact, potentially multiplied, because now you'll have an equity coach on the team that can teach the other coaches how to use an equity lens when they're doing their academic or math or literacy work. So the goal here is to make sure that the coaching team still has all the same skill sets, but they apply all the same principles when they do that work. But some of your other questions related to how the strategic plan might be impacted. Well, when you reduce 2 senior staff members, that they drive a lot of the work associated with the strategic plan. But it doesn't mean that we won't still, in the annual work plan, work towards the goals of the strategic plan, but now we have less staff to do that work. And, you know, equity is a broad thing, right? But so when you say, are we still doing equity work? Everybody in the district does equity work, right? But there's there's certain components of things that some folks might say is equity work, like the summer learning program, that is not in the recommendation. The other comment that you made, the SIA revenues was a number that we put in there. It's an accounting number. It's not an actual reduction in the SIA program. We were trying to preserve the deferred revenue associated with, so what happened was the ministry changed the rules around SIA, and we wanted to spend $4.5 million of the $9 million in deferred revenue in year one, which was 24-25, and 4.5 in 25-26 to kind of blend it over the 2 years. But unfortunately, given our financial situation, that wasn't possible. So we just had to make the adjustment in the background, but that's really all that was. It's not a change in the support to SIA, the SIA program.
That's really.
Oh, just a moment, Trustee Bell, Director, want to just respond.
Thank you. Through you, Madam Chair. Trustee Bell, just to one of your other questions with respect to the Human Rights and Equity Advisor Office, what we've done is centralized a process for all of the complaints that come forward for a couple of reasons. One of them is we were having some complaints coming through to the Human Rights and Equity Advisor that really weren't human rights and had to be redirected as they were just other issues or other matters for investigation. The second one is a better opportunity for us to monitor trends around what concerns are coming forward. And so what we're doing now with the process, and part of the reason why that's all sort of being channeled through one area, is that we'll triage any complaint or concern coming forward and send it off to the Office of the Human Rights and Equity Advisor if it's indeed a human rights issue, or over to Labor Relations, or it might be to the Superintendent of Education, depending on the nature of the concern. That will allow our Human Rights and Equity Advisor to do more of the two core functions that the individual has. One is capacity building around human rights in the system, which was a concern that they could never get to because there were so many investigative pieces. The other one was to ensure that they give us advice looking at the trends on systemic barriers or issues organizationally. So it does set the role of the HREA in a more effective and efficient function, and then assisting in some investigations as may be necessary. That we hope to will reduce the amount of time, it already has reduced the amount of time taken to complete investigations, which is an important aspect of our work, just to make sure we're addressing issues as timely as we can. Some of them are complex and lengthy, but we've already seen a vast reduction in the amount of time it's taking to address those issues. So I just wanted to add that quick point of clarification, and I apologize for jumping in on your comment, Trustee Bell.
Go ahead, Trustee Bell.
No apology necessary. I really appreciate the feedback so far on the question that I've asked. For the large majority of it seems very positive. The cuts have allowed us to move forward in a much more effective, efficient way when it comes to issues of equity, is what I'm hearing. Although I did also hear that with senior staff being cut, that will impact it. So I guess if we could, this is a question for the director, get a response on how this will impact our equity work. When I'm talking about our equity work, I'm talking about those that do not get the same results as the average. Those that have traditionally and currently fallen behind. If you look at the results of students that come from Indigenous backgrounds, for example, that's what I'm talking about when I talk about the equity work or special education students. So yes, in fact, it is broad, but it's definitely worth an assessment of how this impacts our strategic plan and our commitment to equity. Thank you.
Thank you, Trustee Bell. Is there any community member that has any questions? The floor is open. Trustee Lyra, go ahead.
Thanks. I'm going to start by saying I wish we had had more time, and I acknowledge that the CFO said that we got the technical papers quite late, and we've had to deal with both the investigation from the ministry as well as the very short timelines. I don't feel like I've had the time I would need to adequately prepare for this meeting, because this was released at least after 4 o'clock, when is the last time I had a chance to check at it, and this meeting started at 7. And so there are literally millions upon millions of dollars that I would like to have time to go through with more of a comb. I do have a couple of questions. My first question is about, it appears that we're losing 18 FTE from the non-discretionary staffing portfolio, but we are projecting no enrollment changes. And I'm wondering how that came about.
Through you, Chair, there's different, so which table are you talking about? Just to be sure. Are you talking about the report or the budget itself? But it really boils down to formula driven, right? And school driven. So there's averages kick out at different rates. So a different change in composition of JK, SK versus elementary to 4 to 6. So that's why. So it's all formula driven.
Yeah, so it was page 9 of your slides said that you were looking at losing 18.1 elementary teachers from non-discretionary ADE-based changes. But our projected enrollment, I thought, wasn't projected to change out of the elementary or the secondary level, or I thought the numbers were expected to just flow through. And so I'm just sort of wondering.
Yeah, I got it. I got it right now. I see. So it's ADE-based changes. So it's just the mix of the ADE. It's straight formula driven.
Okay. And that's because of the number of students who have moved from grade 3 to grade 4 or from kindergarten to grade 1?
Correct.
Got it. Okay. My second question was about what you have put forward as a balanced budget. I'm a little bit concerned that with $3 million in expected savings mid-year next year not being able to be pointed to, that's not considered a balanced budget because it's sort of postponing the problem into the next year and saying we'll find it at revised estimates or we'll find it over the course of the next year. I'm wondering if we could figure out where you expect to find that $3 million over the course of the next year.
Through you, Chair, we've identified positions that we will potentially reduce through attrition, but we were bound by things like collective agreement restrictions. So some of the reductions that we have identified will take more than a year to accomplish. So when we present the next budget, we will hope to have be in a position to identify those positions. We have taken a fairly flexible approach in the sense that we would have identified a position that we expected attrition on here, and then all of a sudden we get attrition over here. So we have swapped out positions, but we're fairly comfortable that over the course of the next year, we'll be able to identify the remaining positions to offset that $3 million. But we couldn't take those actions as it stands today because of other restrictions.
So if things go poorly and the $3 million that we are projecting doesn't materialize because either we don't get the attrition that we're hoping for and it's all protected by the collective agreement, what is the plan to ensure that we have met our requirements for a balanced budget? Because running a 5th into a 6th deficit budget is going to put us even further under scrutiny.
Right, through your chair. So we started the process of, I don't want to call it a hiring freeze, but a hiring review. And we generated more than $2 million worth of savings in the past 2 years by doing it. And we started it late in the year. We didn't start it in September. So we will start it in September. We also have other levers like portable moves. We're only doing 6 portable moves this year. I didn't cut the portable move budget because I want to make sure that we can properly support EPR and establishing. But if we run ourselves into a situation, we have levers that we can pull to find those savings. But I'm fairly comfortable that we can find those savings through a variety of measures in the in-year. And I would expect that revised estimates that we may see a change in enrollment or revenues or things that could overtake that and not even require us to take any further action.
Okay. Why $3 million? Why not 4 or 2 or 5 or whatever other number?
So it's based on our historical, the last 2 years. So like I said, we had $2 million and we started the process late, and we have some ideas of things that we could, that are more discretionary if we had to. Like I said, portable moves, we can do $500,000. So we have things identified for that $3 million. So I'm fairly comfortable with that $3 million.
But the things you have identified couldn't be put in this report.
They could, but the thing is that we may change them, right? So we will, as we execute through the year, we will make adjustments based on, for example, I could put $500,000 in portable move reduction in here, but then what happens if I need those portable moves for EPR as we go through the EPR working group? then I would change it. So I think it would be, I'm telling you now that I'm comfortable that we can find on a $1.2 billion budget, $3 million. Historically, we found it in savings alone when we started late in the way we did the hiring review. I'm positive that we can continue to find that and as we move forward.
I'm looking for assurance that none of that $3 million is going to come out of school-generated funds being held centrally or held with the accounts, because I'd be very concerned if we started cleaning out parent council funds.
We wouldn't be allowed to do that. Those
Okay.
funds are protected, and we would not be allowed to touch those funds for that purpose. They only can be used for the purpose they were raised for in the first place. Even the schools can't repurpose those funds locally, so we would not take any kind of action like that.
Thank you for the assurance. I did have another concern. You appear to be proposing cuts in employee wellness programs, and those numbers were increased in an effort to try and decrease the number of times we had to fulfill replacement costs, which we were underfunded for. I'm concerned that reducing those the employee wellness numbers are going to bring back up the replacement cost numbers. Can you explain how that decision was made and the rationale behind it?
So some of those positions are currently vacant, and so they've been vacant for quite some time. So that was the recommendation of staff of employee services. They're still doing the employee wellness work. They're just changing the composition, and they feel like they can continue on with the work and still maintain those targets. I think employee wellness is a lot of things, like investment in the BMS training and certain things like that, which we've done pretty heavily over the last 3 years and will continue to do. Those kind of things are really contributing positively to the rate of injury, comfort level of employees while they're on the job. So it's work that we can do that we don't necessarily, or that the employee services felt like they could prioritize within the resources they had.
So when we're talking about employee resources, I'm a little bit concerned on the burnout front that we're going to start overtaxing the employees that we do have and starting to see a significant turnover. If we start to say this position went unfilled because we had a hiring pause or a hiring delay, and then we were dumping all the work on one person, that person quits, and then we cannot find a person to replace them because they were actually doing the jobs of 2.5 people.
Yeah, it's a fair comment. And I think there's a trade-off and a balance there. But I will say that we have that discussion at the deck table. Every time we fill a position, the SOEs are all involved in that. And we specifically say, what would be the impact of not, and how long can we delay? Can we delay for 3 months, 6 months? Should we hire a term? Is it a year? Is it tied to some reductions that we plan on seeing happening in the following year? So we have those discussions, and we ensure that the appropriate staff, for example, I'll use payroll. Many times when my payroll positions come up, it's not much of a discussion. Everybody knows the pressure payroll's under. We don't delay hiring. We're right on the street right away. Other parts of the organization, we might be able to find a more creative way. We can push the work over here. We can delay the work for a couple months. Maybe we can use another resource. Maybe it's a needs teacher. We talk about that. We sort that out at the table as a group.
Okay, I'd like to go back on the list.
Thank you, Trustee Lyra. Trustee Scott?
Thank you. A question about what is in the report itself on page 5 of report 25-038. In the table under learning support services showing discretionary positions, down at the bottom, it says communication disorder analysts, and it looks as though there's going to be a reduction of 1, but then there's another line that doesn't indicate any reduction, but still has savings attached to it.
Yeah, through you, Chair, I know exactly what you're talking about. And the issue is the way we do staffing here. So we don't have strong position control. Sometimes when positions are approved, they're approved as term positions, so they don't get the FTE to create it with them. So we didn't want to actually, it is a 2-person reduction in that team, but only one of the FTE were part of the tracking system that we use. So there are 2 savings there, and there are 2 positions being reduced in people who are on the ground working. But in the budget context, only 1 position is being reduced because that was all that was built into the budget. So I don't want to remove 2 positions when 2 didn't exist. So that's why you see that small discrepancy there.
I assume something similar relates to the central administration temporary positions, and I think there was one other place where there was that kind of a.
So through you, Chair, some of
Industry.
those are related to casual employees. So we don't create an FTE for casual employees. So for example, for admissions, sometimes we will have extra staff work through the summer to deal with all the enrollments that we receive through the summer. And so we won't create an FTE for that, but what we would do is we'll hire some casual employees. So it will be a salary expense, but it won't be an FTE growth.
Thank you for that. And that's all my questions for the instant, but I would appreciate a copy of a paper copy of the slides, because for whatever reason, I didn't get one.
Thank you, Trustee Scott. We'll continue with trustee questions first. Trustee Milburn?
All right, thank you, Madam Chair. I want to start by saying thank you to our staff for continuing year over year to bring your dedication to building a budget that meets unrealistic expectations and unrealistic timelines. I also appreciate that it was a rush to get this together for the meeting tonight, and I believe it's a lesson learned that we're going to need to bring back to agenda planning and planning for our future years. So my first question is, Director, when did you see the budget that is being presented tonight?
Through you, Madam Chair, up until early this afternoon, the Associate Director and our General Manager of Finance were providing information. They've been working right through till literally just before the meeting itself. So even from a senior staff perspective, we've only seen it as if we have DEC on Tuesdays, Directors Executive Council. And so we haven't had a great deal of runway on that either. And I think it's a function of, the budget doesn't come out like clockwork in terms of funds and grants from the ministry, and the election this year was a particular factor of delay. So it's been a quick turnaround for districts across the province of Ontario, coupled with the financial investigation and the incredible detailed work that Kevin and Randy and others have put together for that. So for myself, I only saw that it's essentially shortly before the Board of Trustees has.
All right, thank you, Director. I think that really does emphasize a lesson learned that we need to bring back to agenda planning, because it must be very hard to bring this rushed budget forward, especially with the unrealistic timelines the province is setting. So my next questions are going to focus on the rationale behind some of the reductions, because I feel like that is some of the narrative that is missing in the report. So looking at the report, we're going to start with item 13, and I would like to know the rationale behind the learning support services reductions that are proposed, why these positions, and what else was looked at when proposing these reductions.
Through you, Chair. So this was something that the executive table worked with LSS on. LSS made these recommendations. These were the reductions they felt they could absorb from a central perspective. The majority of these positions were doing central work. Yes, they were supporting the classroom. Sometimes they would go into the classroom, but these were the reductions that the superintendent felt that she could manage internally, and shifting responsibilities around, or it might mean a few more a heavier caseload for a social worker or a psychologist, so that's where these recommendations came from.
All right, thank you. So we're going to continue down the list. So going to item 14, can you explain a bit more of the rationale of why the discretionary and teacher and principal positions that were selected, why these reductions and why not other positions?
Through you, Chair, same thing. These positions, well, the e-learning was a change in how we were loading the courses. We were putting in the academic staffing report. We were doing it incorrectly. We were putting 23-1 like we were for other for regular in-class attendance, but that's not the way we're funded, and that's not the way those courses are loaded. So we corrected that error. So that was a large chunk of that. The other ones were reductions that the team felt we could make internally. Had to do with when I spoke about the coaches. It's consolidating the coaches. A lot of that is the consolidation of the coaching model. So taking positions that were spread out through the organization and centralizing them and clarifying their role and focus and lenses that they would use in doing that work tied to strategic plan and academic achievement and well-being.
All right, thank you for the additional rationale. Specifically looking at header 15, there are 20 central administration positions that are proposed for reduction. That is a very broad category. Can you give some examples of what positions are within that category?
Yeah, just one second. I'm going to get the chart. So when I talk about shaving the ice cube, this is shaving the ice cube at the corporate level. So this is positions within the organization. Some of them are within HR, for example, a human resources dispatcher. So that work would shift to someone else within the organization. Some admin assistants. So there's a variety of positions there, but those are basically all corporate administrative positions here at in the headquarters that we as a group decided we could reduce as part of the savings initiative. It was also part of the benchmarking thing I talked about, where we were comparing ourselves to both the funding formula and other school boards across the province. There was 4 or 5 other school boards where we looked and said, how many HR staff do they have? How many payroll clerks do they have? How many governance services support clerks do they have? How many? And so we went through a process like that, and we identified areas and targets, and then we sat together as a team and we talked about them, and this is where we came up as a group.
All right. Thank you for the explanation. I only have 2 more sections. So following down, so going to header 16, can you explain the rationale behind why these positions and why not other positions?
Through you, some of those were those aren't reductions. Only 1 reduction and 6 growth, right? So there's only 1 reduction there, and it was school ops. It's mostly related. The growth was mostly related to school ops and formula driven. So if a school gets a certain number of students and it kicks out an entitlement for some support staff, and then we actually couldn't make a lot of reductions to the facilities custodian. We continue to grow in the size of the organization and the number of buildings and schools that we open. And I know sometimes I hear a lot about, well, schools only have 40% capacity, why don't you close 40% of the rooms and then reduce. But that's not realistic. It doesn't happen. Those spaces, if somebody's in those buildings, those spaces tend to get used and then they need to be cleaned. They turn into decompression rooms. They turn into a variety of different resources that the schools, principals, teachers, and whatnot need. So, but we did see one spot where we could make one adjustment. And in fact, probably should have been growth in this budget for custodians, because we are opening Riverside South, but we did do some internally shuffling around to address that need without growth. So cost avoidance, I would call it. But you know, that's one of those areas where when you have 17,000 vacant people places across your organization and you got to take care of all those buildings, it doesn't give you much flexibility to find further reductions.
All right, and then last one, and then can I go back on the speakers list, Madam Chair? So looking at header 17, can you please explain the rationale behind the extended day and early learning positions, both the reduction and growth, and why these positions?
Through you, Chair. So it's really more, it's growth overall. It's just a change in composition of how that support's being offered. So it's just, and I think it has a lot to do with the ability to hire and the qualifications that are available. And so I don't want to go in any further. I don't know if the GM of early learning wanted to add anything to that or not.
Through you, Chair, in regards to discretional positions, I think the changes are really just related to depending on ratios and legislative requirements.
All right, thank you for providing the additional rationale. It is very appreciated. And like I said, Madam Chair, if I can go back on the speakers list, that would be appreciated.
Thank you. Thank you, Trustee Milburn. I do have you second time. We'll go to a community member, Mr. Glover.
Thank you, sir, for your report through you, Madam Chair. I just browsed through this report very quickly. There are a lot of assumptions in this report. So my question is, based on your experience, expertise, you've been doing this for a couple of years. Is this achievable and realistic, given the size of the organization, given the $3 million, wiggle room levers? Do you think this is actually, a realistic and achievable budget?
Through you, Chair, I do. And part of the reason why I believe this is a realistic and achievable budget is because we have addressed some of the pressures. I showed you the corporate pressure slide. In 24-25, we didn't have $4 million dedicated to WSIB, but it was a surprise expense that came and based on the new ratios from, and it's not something that we could avoid. It's a statutory benefit. And it surprised us in the last 2 years. So by addressing, we also put more funding into OT replacement costs. So when you address your pressures and align your revenues and expenses properly, it gives you more flexibility with the remaining resources that you do have. The other thing is that we've changed some of our business practices. In the past, we were using an average rate to staff our EP grants, and what was happening was that was too low, and what happened was it would create a financial pressure on us that we had to absorb in the organization. So we're addressing those kind of changes, and so those are things that you can't show in the budget, but will show up on the balance sheet at the end of the day when your expenses are down, because you're not covering that $400,000 extra in the math grant or the reading intervention grant. So when you make proper business decisions and you manage things properly, it reduces the amount of pressures that you have to deal with in year and out year. In 24-25, we were on target to surplus somewhere between, in 23-24, we were on target to surplus somewhere between $7 to $8 million, right? So I believe that the room is there for that. And as we better align our expenses and clean up our budgets and discrepancies, that room might go away because we'll actually have budgets and expenses that are properly aligned. But right now, I believe that room still sits within the organization. And better business practices ensure that we're not dealing with these surprise pressures. We're dealing with them as part of the budget up front. Instead of having $9 million at revised estimates that we didn't budget for, which is really what we were dealing with in the 24-25 year, that's all planned now. It's all properly planned, right? I can't say there won't be another surprise, but we don't have any pay raises coming. So those are already all settled in the collective agreements. That's usually a significant underfunding area. So if I knew that next year was a pay raise year, I'd be a little bit more concerned, but it's not. So I feel very confident that this budget is a very fair reflection of our revenues and expenses, and that we can land a balanced budget if this budget is passed by the trustees with the reductions that are recommended.
Yeah, it brings me to my next question. You touched a bit about it, right? It's about the risk. Obviously, I haven't been here for long, but last year you were right. You had the contracts. You also had enrollments where it was sort of miscalculated. Do you foresee any other risks that sort of keep you up at nights? Looking at the budget, are there obviously these risks you can't forecast because they come up? And based on your budget, right? If there was a headwind, how would is the budget flexible? Is it tangible, or would a big surprise sort of derail this whole process?
Through you, Chair, there could be a big surprise, and would it derail the whole process? No, we would look at things. We would see what we could do to address that. It's not impossible to reduce expenses. Like I said, even with fiscal prudence, we've seen $5 to $7 million surplus in the budget right? I don't believe we have the same amount of flexibility we've had in the past when you keep squeezing and keep squeezing. But I believe that we've generally forecasted the things that we've been dealing with and revised estimates at year end in advance in a better way than we have ever done before, right? And so I think as long as we don't see significant changes in our absenteeism rates, and I think that if the only risk is maybe a 300 to 500 drop in student enrollment, that could be something that we would have to work through. But the province has provisions for things like that in their funding formula. So if your enrollment drops past a certain point, they start to give you a supplemental funding because they know it's not something that school boards can just zig and zag on. And so I think if we can pass, if we as a group can pass this budget, I think this is a budget that we could land. And I think it doesn't have, I'm not saying there's no risk in this budget, but I don't think it has significant risk that can't be managed internally through good operational and business practices.
And that brings me to my next question. A lot of organizations, including this one, they're having to do more with less. So in terms of innovation tends to solve problems. Taking a look at the board from a top down, do you see any more efficiencies or any innovative ways where money could be saved? Do you see any duplication of services, or do you think the organization is a lean machine and you're squeezing all that you can in this budget, or is it something that you're looking at as an organization on where you could be more efficient?
Through you, Chair, I think we've been making a lot of changes to different parts of the program, but I do think that there's still parts of the program that we need to look at. There's still parts that aren't in alignment the way we'd like to see them in alignment. So there's certainly room for operational efficiency or potentially divestment of certain things that we're doing. And I think that's work that we will see in the next coming year or two, is looking at certain segments like, and I hate to throw things out, but I'll throw something like McSkimming out, right? McSkimming, is there something different we could do with McSkimming to change the revenue stream there? Is there something we could do with the province? Right now, it does cost us more than it brings in. It's not a dedicated school site, but it has a lot of value, especially to the Indigenous community. So it's not something we can just divest of. And it's not something, even if we decided today to divest of, that we could divest of. It was a donated property to us. We would have to go through some processes, and there's some legalities associated with what we could and couldn't do with that property. But it's obviously something as a school board that we need to look at. We also have multiple capital properties that are sitting with the ministry now for divestment that will help improve our financial position. If 2 or 3 of those properties sell, you could see $10 to $15 million in proceeds of disposition show up in the school board that would help us alleviate our accumulated surplus, our deficit situation. So there's a lot of things going on in the school board. We're investigating different types of partnerships. For example, the summer learning program, we'd like to find a way to see that continue with a third-party partner. We're going to look and see what we can do in that area, and it might involve sharing space. It's not always about just not offering the service, but maybe finding someone else who can bridge that gap for us where we can't or are not funded to do it. So there's a lot of things going on in the school board, and there's a lot of parts of the program that I think we can continue to evolve in. Do I think there's going to be this really awesome technical innovation piece that's going to change our teacher ratio or what? We're bound by collective agreements. Our job is to put teachers in front of students, right? And that's our core business, and that's what 80% of our resources do, is to put teachers and educators of different kinds in front of students, right? And the rest of it is to operate the program and clean the buildings and pay the lights and heat and stuff like that. So I think there would have to be a core change in the way teaching happens, and before we see fundamental changes to that would save us millions and millions of dollars. We are working on ERP implementation that will help streamline some of our processes and payroll and things like that. That might change staff complements, but I don't see it as us requiring less staff, but maybe the opportunity to support our members in the district in a different way with a higher level of expertise and more data and jump on things that tend to be owned astray differently, and because we have data to make better decisions with. But I think as we evolve as an organization, you will see, onesies and twosies here and there that'll change the way we do business, but not fundamental sweeping changes.
Thanks for bearing with my questions. My last question would be, so you talked about your core function of putting, teachers in front of students. In terms of what the senior administration is focusing on, student achievement and well-being, sort of, simplifying that being, overarching goal there. Could you sort of quantify, how this budget is going to affect student achievement and well-being? Do you see a low impact, moderate impact, extreme impact, and what are you doing to mitigate any negativity when you're looking at your core goals of student achievement and well-being?
Through you, Chair, that's an awesome question, and I'll tell you why. Because that's what we talk about at the executive table for the last 6 months. What can we do to move the needle on student achievement? It's not about throwing more teachers or more bodies at the situation. It's about changing the way we focus our time and energy, moving away from our distractors, moving towards our core business, moving towards simplification. EPRs was a big step in that, and you're going to continue to see work through program and learning and through our executive table and tying to our achievement, to our strategic plan, activities direct related to how can we improve results in the classroom. You saw it with a recent video that Marva Major did. I think her team is doing wonderful work with math and learning, and I know we're doing great literacy work. And this is the kind of stuff that's going to make a difference. And getting all of our coaches focused on that with the equity lens, with some of the other lens, but going down there with the purpose of academic achievement being one of the priorities while they're in that room is going to help, I think, in those areas. Because, I think if you're trying to do too much, you're not doing anything well. I think if we start to focus on some of those things better, you're going to see better results. And you can already see it in some of the results that we've been seeing with the math coaches. They've seen improvement in some of those grades, significant improvement. And it really has to do with focus. So I think if we start to focus in some of these areas, you'll see the improvement that we're looking for.
Thank you, Mr. Gardner. We'll go to you, Thank you, Mr. Glover. Now we'll go to you, Ms. Gardner.
Thank you very much, Chair. I have a question through you, Chair. In recent labor decisions involving Ontario teachers, which we've heard about tonight and we keep hearing about, collective agreements, arbitrators have ruled on salary increases and other compensation issues. For example, the Elementary Teachers Federation of Ontario rightly received an 11.25% salary increase for their 80,000 members. My question actually relates to the funding from this government, and I'm wondering if perhaps the director could explain why is it, or what rationale has this government given for not actually properly funding when an arbitrator made a legally binding decision? Thank you.
Director?
Through you, Madam Chair. Hi, Susan. This is a question I think best directed at the provincial government in terms of the delta between the agreements that were rightfully bargained by all means. Our staff work diligently and deserve every penny that they receive for the hard work that they do. I do think there were some simplifications in the funding formulas. I will ask the Associate Director to comment on any specifics that at the end of the day didn't equate and created a bit of a gap in the funding to the point you're making. So I can't comment on the government's calculation, but I do appreciate the comment you're making for collectively bargained agreements, especially when you consider it's not only for one given year, it's retroactively in many cases. I'll ask the Associate Director if there's any technical specification that he'd like to add, but it's a point well made.
Through you, Chair, I think I'll stick with what the director had to say. I think it's really a question for the province. It's not a question that we can answer at this table here. And obviously, the decisions they make impact these budgets. They've got tough decisions to make too. It's not like they are not running their own deficit and they have their own priorities that they have to invest in. They have And you do see some increases in school board funding, and we're appreciative of the increases that we did get. It's never going to be enough, and we'd like to see more invested in education, especially because we are in the education sector, and it does impact our youth, and it's an investment that pays dividends for the government and productivity and opportunity for our youth, and as they become young adults and move into the working world, it's an investment that pays back major dividends. But again, they have a tough job to do too. It's been an economically challenging time for federal, provincial, municipal governments across the board. You know, we have to work as a responsible body to utilize the resources that we are given the best we can. And I think that's what we can do. And I think that's what this budget recommends.
Right. Supplemental, if I may. I just have a, you know, I do understand that, you know, I mean, the economic landscape for everyone right now is difficult. Having said that, while I appreciate that the question is better asked to the ministry, better asked to the government, I certainly feel that, you know, it may be a question best asked, you know, by the board. Thank you.
Thank you, Ms. Gardner. And we'll go to second-time speakers. Trustee Lyra?
Okay. I'm going to start by being more specific on Susan's question. What specifically was the delta between the amount that we were funded by the province and the amount that was collectively bargained? How much are we in the hole?
That's a broad question for what group? For, like, I mean, are you talking salaries for fiscal year 25, 26?
So the question was about the arbitration.
Right.
And so the arbitration said there was an 11.25% salary increase over a certain number of years, and that we had to go back and make up that amount, and we were given money by the government to do so. What is the delta between the amount that we were given by the ministry and that we had to then go back and pay out?
Yeah, so I could go back and look at that. The problem is that it's not so straightforward because there's a lot of factors in there, especially on the health and trust and benefits side. But I've presented at in our financial statements that I believe the amount that we were underfunded for that pay raise was in the vicinity of $19 million. And that is what drove our 23-24 deficit, which is why we were running a surplus. And then we went into a deficit situation. We were in a deficit situation by, I think it was $12 million, but it was the $19 million in underfunding that drove that. Unfortunately, the surplus we were running at the time was chewed away as well by that underfunding. So, but it's the way that we're funded, it's just so complicated they don't make it easy to unwind that data. And it's not just in one category of expense. And some of that is also decisions that we made. So we have employees on the books that the government never agreed to fund, right? We have third-party agencies funding these things, and then 11% pay raises come in, and the government shrugs their hands and says, they're not part of the baseline. So to unwind that is a very, how can I tell you which employees we had on the books that were third party for 3 years prior to, right? And which organizations were willing to cough up a certain percentage. Also the REP grants, right? Some of them were given to us. We chose to hire staff as opposed to hiring consultants or using it to buy tools and digital tools and this and that. So we made the staffing decision, but yet the back pay impacted those, right? Some of them were funded, some of them weren't. There's so many complexities to that, but I'm going to tell you, as we sit here now, I feel that we were close to $19 million underfunded for both Bill 124 and the collective agreement pay raises that all came rushing through during that period of time.
Okay. Thank you. I had a little earlier, we were talking about the Human Rights and Equity Advisor. My understanding is that was a specifically funded position by the ministry. With the changing nature of that position, role, portfolio, is it going to continue to be a special funded position, or are we losing out on that fund by changing the role?
Through you, Madam Chair, that with respect to the Human Rights and Equity Advisor and the funding that came, that's a good example of what the Associate Director is talking about. What we moved was an investigator position that wasn't funded by the government in any capacity. The role of Human Rights and Equity Advisor was funded and remains funded through essentially one of the grants, a TPA, that continues to be in place. But the work for a district like ours is broader than one individual. So we've in the change that I described to Trustee Bell, we've reestablished sort of the central dual focus of that particular role, run the investigations through our labor relations and triage where human rights related ones do go to that office. But that's a good example where for a period of time we had more than one employee but had funding for one position.
So
But that remains intact.
yeah, so just to be clear, we're keeping the funding. We're not giving up that funding through the change of mandate.
Correct.
Okay. My next question is about specific funding for the math superintendency. So there was specific funding from the ministry for a math superintendency for a number of years. We are proposing to remove the math superintendency. Are we giving up that funding, or are we, or did that funding disappear?
Through you, Madam Chair, we are maintaining that funding. We are having a system principal carry a bulk of that load of the numeracy portfolio under the direction of a superintendent to try and minimize the impact on the classroom. Ideally, I'd love to have both of the special assignment superintendents intact, but to contribute to the greater good of our fiscal situation, we reduced 2 positions. That was one of them where we felt we could absorb it and still have a system principal have that lead role in program services. But it's a good example of where we've made some adjustments to how we're structured. And the funding remains.
That was the question. Thank you. I did have a general concern about using the proceeds of disposition to fill holes in the budget. It feels very much like we're selling the couch to make rent, and like that's not a solution long term. I'm wondering if you have a comment on how these structural changes are going to allow us to not look to selling buildings in the future to make sure that we're not running consecutive budget problems.
Through you, Chair. So I do see them as 2 separate problems. One, the proceeds of disposition is more in line with helping rebuild the accumulated reserve. And I feel like we could try to build the accumulated reserve based on the annual program that we do, but to build that back in a healthy way would mean we'd have to cut another couple $1 million out of the program and surplus every year. And I don't believe that that's in the best interest of the board either. I think we have to deal with our structural deficit problem by changing our program delivery model and making sure that we align the revenues and expenses in such a way that we have balanced budgets that maybe surplus a little bit of money here and there, but really do utilize the resources the way they were intended to year by supporting our students. And then we take care of the accumulated surplus problem with the sale of assets. And the reason why I say that is because we also paid for a lot of portables, and we have a portable liability that's sitting there in the vicinity of, is it $11 million, Kevin? I can't remember the exact amount. Around $9 million. So the proceeds of disposition of the sale of a couple of school sites actually is in line with how we spent some of the funding that we were receiving year over year. So it's actually all in alignment and would be a real easy way to fix 2 problems and not get ourselves in a situation. Because I agree with you wholeheartedly. I don't want to get into a situation where you have to sell assets to manage our day-to-day business. Our day-to-day business needs to be managed differently than the rebuilding of the accumulated reserve.
Director?
And I just wanted to add, Trustee Lyra, because I think I agree completely with both of you in terms of that aligned perspective. We shouldn't be using assets to pay for annual costs. Assets should be used exactly as the Associate Director has explained. One of the things I wanted to share, and this gets back to Mr. Glover's question around, I feel like we are squeezing our current structure to make it as manageable as we can, but the decisions made around the vision exercise, the program review at the elementary level will allow us over the next decade, increasingly year to year, to be able to load classrooms more effectively and efficiently, making better use of that annual budgetary process. I know those were not easy decisions that we made on the 13th of May, but we started work on the 14th of May on the next chapter of the vision exercise, adult and continuing education. This is not going in the chronological order of a student's experience through their educational journey, but we're taking the same approach to that review that'll be coming forward to the board in the fall to look at, okay, what is our structure? How can we reorganize the structure to make better use of the annual funds so that we're not doing exactly what you said, Trustee Lyra? It's an excellent point.
So I have a quick question about the way we're allowed to spend capital funds and the way we're allowed to spend operational funds. My concern, my question is, are the proceeds of disposition when they're used to pay off an accumulated deficit, not subject to those kinds of requirements?
Through you, Chair, we would have to get special permission to use the proceeds disposition in the manner that I want to use it for. I already did reach out to the ministry and socialize the idea of what we were anticipating doing. I think, and they received it well. They seemed to think that it made sense, especially given the fact that we did have such a large portable purchase over the last few years. It ties in nicely. And we don't have an anticipated plan for the proceeds. It's not like we need those capital proceeds for something different, right? So I think, I think it's a rational, reasonable plan, and I believe it will receive ministry support, especially if we make the right decisions to show that we've aligned our regular program at the same time.
Yeah, so to be clear, my question was that it is against the written rules. We would have to seek an exception.
You are correct.
Okay. I have a comment about something I've heard two different people say in different ways. I heard Mr. Glover say it, and I heard you say it, that we are asking people to do more with less. We are shuffling responsibilities from individuals who used to work here onto individuals who still work here as we reduce the number of positions. I'm a little bit concerned that this is indicative of a trend in public education, that we are moving towards more people being required to do more, teach more kids, or teach kids with fewer supports, fewer adults in the classroom. And I'm a little bit worried that the quality of education is going to suffer accordingly. I don't know if that's specifically a question that you can answer about how the budget is going to impact this, because I know that we are bound with the monies that we have. But I wanted to raise that I am concerned about it. And one of the things I was hoping to do, had I had more time, was to compare these numbers inflation adjusted and student enrollment adjusted against numbers from a number of years ago, to see what the impact is looking like. I'd like to go back on the list because I wasn't quite done that point.
Director?
Through you, Madam Chair, I'll begin and I'll turn it over to the Associate Director. I think we're suffering because we're trying to do too much. Part of our goal in strategic simplification, to focus in, as has been mentioned previously, on achievement and well-being, is to minimize some of the extraneous pieces we're doing that are clearly not adding value. Now, we've got to work to do in the core itself, and we're getting on that. What we're doing as senior staff, we talked about it today, this afternoon, we've been talking about it for months, is essentially a baseline set of metrics across achievement and well-being that we're able to then hone in on and monitor over time in a much more balanced qualitative and quantitative way, to try and strip away some of the things that are exhausting a tremendous amount of resources, human, material, fiscal, and get to the heart of the work we need to do with confidence that it will turn our achievement and wellness, our learning and our wellness, around in a more positive direction moving forward. In the 2 years I've been here, I've heard some repeat conversations at this table around some of the reports we've been bringing. So it's a point well made. What we're actually trying to do is alleviate some of the pressures on our staff. There's no question we face some budgetary challenges, but the more integrated coaching model is a great example of re-looking at our work in a more innovative way to ensure we're amplifying equity, we're amplifying the work of that collaborative team, and not working in departmentalized silos. So you're asking a complex question, Trustee Lyra. The proof will be in the pudding of our results over the next few years, but we are looking to simplify strategically to get us focused on what the Associate Director has been talking about. And I'm excited about the thinking we've put into it as a senior staff. Sometimes these challenges do provide you the opportunity. Sometimes they force you to think of things a bit differently. And that's the kind of work we've been doing. And there's a lot more clarity in my mind that we're bringing forward, and intentional focus that I think we will benefit from over time. But we've got work to do. There's no question.
Thank you, Director. Trustee Milburn?
Thank you, Madam Chair. So I just would like to clarify that we have a budget meeting scheduled for tomorrow. So does this need to be voted on tonight, or could we vote on this tomorrow?
Just a moment, Trustee Milburn. Thank you. So tomorrow night's evening is a continuation of tonight's. So if we don't vote tonight, we will continue tomorrow night. Does that help?
It does. It does. You can take me off the speakers list for now. I may go back on.
Thank you, Trustee Milburn. Associate Director?
Through you, Chair, I wonder if Trustee Milburn's question is, would trustees rather continue the discussion tomorrow, or would they rather delay tomorrow's meeting and continue the discussion on the 18th? I think the 18th is the next time we have a committee of the whole budget scheduled. I think that would give trustees the opportunity to spend a week with the documents I provided, come up with questions. If they have further questions, I think that's probably more the question that we should be asking this table. Because, you know, I do apologize that I couldn't get you guys these documents sooner than I could, but I do realize that the more that you would like some time with them. And I wonder if delaying tomorrow's meeting and having the 18th is a better solution for the group. I leave that up to you. I will make a couple of comments though about that before, as you contemplate that. A lot of what you see in this budget is exactly like you've seen in this budget time year after year after year. The only changes in this budget are the reductions. This is not a growth year. There are some reductions in this budget. And I think as trustees, what you want to ask yourself is, are those reductions rational, reasonable, and something that we need as a group, decisions that we need to make to pass this budget? And I would say that those recommendations came from weeks of work, months of work from the executive table. There was no one person who came up with any one of those reductions on their own. This was the teamwork of the folks who have hundreds of years of experience in education that said, you know, these are the changes we're going to recommend to the trustees so that we can pass a balanced budget. And so, you know, you could look through and you could do, you know, correlation to inflation and things like that. And I'm not saying that that's not interesting and whatnot. It won't change the revenues. It won't change the expenses. There's no new revenues. Those revenues went to salary increases, inflation increases, the pressures that I detailed out that we had no choice but to support. The real question is, are you okay with the summer learning program no longer being offered? Are you okay with the staff reductions that we're making as a group? And that's the, how much time do you need to contemplate and discuss that part of the budget? Because that's really what I think the committee of the whole needs to contemplate.
Trustee Scott was going to speak to it.
Yes, I just wanted to confirm that we actually have a budget committee of the whole meeting scheduled for Monday, the 16th next week. And I was in communication with staff today with regard to holding a special board meeting immediately following that, assuming that we do reach a point where we're able to vote, because we've always been concerned that even once the board has approved a budget, there's still a lot of work for staff to do to take it away and make sure that every last piece of it is in the format and with the correct numbers to send to the ministry.
Thank you, Trustee Scott. So then did you want to speak though?
Oh, I had my hand up for whenever it's my turn on this second time speakers list.
I believe it is your turn for second time speaker.
And what I wanted to comment on, I mean, we do hear a lot about doing more with less. But in my experience, most of the time it's not really, we want people to do more with less, but what we want them to do is do things differently. And I know certainly there are a lot of things that I do that I don't need to do the way I do them because I'm using time that I don't need to spend to do little things that aren't really necessary if I just want to get the task completed. There are other things where it's really hard to make that kind of change. But I think for a lot of things, there's nobody for whom 100% of the day is entirely productive of necessary things. And if we can use technology to support some changes, if we can adapt our practices in whatever our particular role is in order to get a better result, potentially sometimes with less work, I think we need to be doing those things. We need to be looking at that. And that's really what I think the coaching model is about in part, because our staff have come into the district at many different times. They didn't all learn the same stuff in teachers college or in trade school or in the early childhood educator program. And things have changed because research has told us differently. So while there may be some instances that, yes, you have to do more with less, I'm not sure that it is necessarily a universal problem. And I just have to look at how much schools have changed during my own lifetime. Because certainly class sizes now for grade 1 to 3 are half the size of any class I was in those grades. Every classroom in the school had eight desks times 5 rows bolted to the floor, and a couple more desks tucked into the corners of the classroom to hold the extra kids, because sometimes there were more than 40. But at the same time, when we look at how conditions are now, that we are in a much more complex society, and so things have changed a lot, I think that we need to modify our practice and keep up with the research, because we know some things we used to do are not effective. Other things are better.
Thank you, Trustee Scott. First time speaker, Trustee Blackburn.
Thank you, Madam Chair, and through you. And I too would like to thank staff for the getting this report together and getting all the numbers together in a very short time. And I'm sure there's lots of people in the finance department who are running on very little sleep. So hopefully tonight might be better for you. I'd also like to thank our Federation partners who held a demonstration protest outside the out on Greenbank tonight to draw attention to the fact that these cuts are predominantly as a result of underfunding from the Ford government, underfunding in general, but in particular, grossly underfunded special education envelope. So hopefully we can get the public on board to lobby the provincial government to improve that situation. Just from a logistical point of view, Madam Chair, I heard what the Associate Director had to say, and I'm not sure if we're going to in any way change our schedule, but my concern about not meeting tomorrow night and leaving it till Monday is, in my experience, if some of my colleagues have amendments, those amendments become very time consuming, and then I would worry that we wouldn't actually pass the budget next Monday night. So anyways, that's just my 2 cents about that situation, but it's not a hill I'm going to die on, and whatever the will of the community is, I'll be happy with. Thank you.
Thank you, Trustee Blackburn. Second time speaker, Trustee Bell.
Great, thank you. My question is to the director, taking into account that we're discussing whether or not to have a meeting tomorrow and or next week. Do you and your senior team need some more time to provide us with a greater analysis on how these reductions will impact our strategic plan?
Through you, Madam Chair, I appreciate the question, Trustee Bell. You know, beyond the actual technical papers and the amounts, senior staff has been speaking about the nature of the potential reductions for months. I don't believe that as a senior team would we require more information. The associate director and the finance department have really laid out the non-negotiables and some of the areas where there's a little bit of wiggle room. We've done our very best to minimize the impact on the classroom, rethink the way we do some of the work to minimize impact at the central level, as well as Chair Scott had pointed out. So from a staff perspective, you know, we could debate this amongst ourselves for another few weeks and present you essentially the same report anyway. So from a staff perspective, it is what it is. It has been rushed, there's no question. And again, I thank the team, the finance department for all the work they've done, but we really are where we are considering the elements we cannot change in terms of funding. And we think we've got a plan forward that, again, has us rethink a few things and minimizes the impact in others. So we're prepared for whether it's the conversation tomorrow night or if better situated next Monday, staff is fine with that as well.
Thank you. And through you, Chair, in response, I would very much appreciate a much more fulsome response to how these reductions will impact our strategic plan. So whether that's tomorrow or next week, I really hope that you can lay out some of the details of how we will or will not be able to meet our objectives of our strategic plan with the reductions that have been made tonight. A couple of related questions to that. How and when will the advisory committees beyond sitting at this table be able to get feedback from their committees and ask the questions or have the backing from their tables in order to ask the questions? Are there any plans to consult with the advisory committees on the budget?
Through you, Madam Chair, 2 points. One, if there's specific elements, Trustee Bell, that you'd like some feedback on, just send us a quick email either through myself or Randy. Happy to prepare a response for that if it's really detailed information or respond at the next meeting. So please send that along the way. We always value the input from our advisory committees. Again, the timelines are tight as we do have to pass a budget. We'll bring forward and seek any input from advisory committees, having the report made public this evening, giving them some time, as Trustee Lyra pointed out, to digest it. Happy to take any of the feedback they might have for us, because I know there may or may not be committee meetings that happen over the next short while. So for any of our chairs or co-chairs of our advisory committees, if there are specific questions or if there are specific aspects of feedback or input, by all means, please send them our way. We're happy to take a look at them and to incorporate them in some of our responses, if not for tomorrow night, for Monday evening.
Okay, just to clarify the question again, is an analysis with key takeaways on how these reductions will impact our strategic plan. So again, what are our objectives in the strategic plan and how these reductions will impact it? I know one of the things that we talk about quite consistently is how our efforts will support and or not Indigenous students, for example. And if that advisory committee is not meeting next week, what will be the impacts of the reductions on Indigenous students is an important question to answer. How will these cuts or these reductions impact adult high school, which is another incredible area where we can really make great gains in equity, not only in our school system, but within our community. And how will these cuts impact our transition towards implementing the elementary program review? That's the type of analysis that I need in order to vote on the budget. So I'm really hopeful at the next meeting that those issues, but a greater sense of what we have to give up in our strategic plan. And if there's nothing, if we're going to achieve everything, that's great. Let me know. But if there are areas that we won't be able to advance, I'd like some more detail on that. And that's all for me this evening. Thanks.
Thank you, Trustee Bell. Third time speaker, Trustee Lara.
Start by moving that at the conclusion of this meeting, we defer to the Monday, the 16th, The 16th, yes.
So you don't wish to meet tomorrow evening then?
I'm going to need time to go through this. It's quite late. It's already 8:30. I like to go to bed at a reasonable hour. I'd like to have some time to go through this and understand. And I think I'm going to need more than the amount of time I can cram in at lunch tomorrow to do so.
Thank you. Trustee Larish, so the motion is on the floor to defer to Monday evening, June 16th.
At the conclusion of the meeting.
Pause for just a couple minutes. Thanks. So is there anyone else who wants to speak this evening? Mr. Glover, Trustee Scott, you also wanted to speak still this evening?
Do we have this on the floor as a motion? And if we do, then anybody speaking now would have to be speaking to the motion, yes? And I would like to speak.
You would like to speak to the motion? Okay. So the motion is on the floor. So Trustee Scott then?
Thank you. Before we take a vote on this, I would like to ask staff, in terms of giving people time to digest the report that we have before us this evening, and submit questions, what kind of timeline would you need in order to be able to meaningfully provide answers to any questions on Monday evening? Because if we are going to do it on Monday, I think we need to be mindful of what Trustee Blackburn said about the amount of time that would be taken up. And that would, I think, mean people should submit their questions sooner rather than later. But I'd like to hear staff's thoughts on that, please.
I'll begin, thank you, Madam Chair. I'll begin just with a great appreciation and understanding that we've provided an incredibly tight timeline for the Board of Trustees on this report. So I'm going to ask the Associate Director when a sort of an end date would be to submit questions in order to be prepared for the Monday night from his and his staff's perspective.
Through you, Chair, I guess it really depends on the depth of the question, right? And this is the problem. I could take a question on Monday on the fly and maybe have an answer, or maybe not have an answer. But it really depends on the depth of the question. I think if I could have questions by Thursday close of business, like Thursday, I could work on them Friday and Monday. If I get a question that I think is unreasonable as far as the type of time and analysis it would take, I'll let that particular individual who posed that question know. But I think Thursday, if I could get questions by Thursday, I could have meaningful responses to those kind of questions by Monday. And of course, if you have a question on Friday or Monday that pops up, I would take it as well and do my best to answer it. But if you really want my team to have a fair period of time to analyze it or collaborate with other parts of the organization, because the reality is that I'm the holder of the bucket, but I don't manage the program that goes into the bucket. It's the superintendents around the organization that manage different parts of the program that I have to collaborate with to get their assistance on answering some of these questions. So if I could get my questions by Thursday night, I'll do my best to answer them. And again, that doesn't mean if something pops up or a number doesn't make sense to you, that you couldn't ask a question after that date. But
Trustee Blackburn, you wanted to speak to the motion?
Just to follow up, out of respect, I think it's really important that people who have questions get them in a timely fashion. As the associate director has indicated, he would prefer Thursday at whatever end of business day. But I would remind you, it doesn't mean you have to wait that long. You can give them before, and that way there wouldn't be necessarily an inundation of lots of questions, and people can give fulsome, non-rushed answers, which would be great. And again, for me, if it's and I've quickly checked with some people in the room, I'm happy to support this motion and meet again on Monday. Thank you, Madam Chair.
Thank you, Trustee Blackburn. So the motion on the floor is Trustee Scott?
I need to be a second time speaker because I just wanted to hear what the actual wording of the motion is. If it suggests that the committee of the whole budget meeting scheduled for the 11th be canceled, that this and this committee then would continue on Monday the 16th. Or words to that effect. I just want to be sure that it's clear that we are not just, we're actually canceling the committee of the whole meeting if this is approved.
General Counsel is going to give us some clarity.
Thank you, Madam Chair, and through you. So procedurally, I think this is where we're at. The meeting scheduled for tomorrow night was actually not scheduled as a separate meeting. It was just a continuation of tonight. Whereas the meeting for Monday is a separate meeting from tonight, not a continuation of tonight, from my understanding. The motion on the floor right now is a motion to defer. Procedurally, it's not supposed to be debate on that motion, unless you're talking about the specific date that you're deferring it to, which you are talking about. What should happen at this point is we should essentially vote on whether or not we're deferring to a future date, and if we are, that future date would only really be Monday. If we want to come back tomorrow night, you can vote down the motion to defer because tomorrow night is simply a continuation of tonight. So there would be no need for a motion if we're just coming back tomorrow night. Does that make sense?
Actually, historically, when we've done continuation meetings, the series of budget meetings have been dealt with as continuation of the same meeting until we get to the end of the budget generally. So it really, the Monday night meeting would be a second continuation meeting if we keep the meeting tomorrow night.
So we'll go back to the mover, Trustee Lyra.
The intent of this motion is at the end of this meeting, we go home and come back on Monday, and we can send all of our questions in advance to the associate director. And I moved the motion so that it was at the end of this meeting, we conclude and come back on Monday. Whether you want to make that a deferral to Monday, whether you want to just make it a motion to cancel the meeting tomorrow night, I'm ambivalent. But pick one.
So are we clear then? The motion is to defer to Monday, June 16th.
At the conclusion of this meeting.
At the conclusion of this meeting. There are no more speakers on the list. So we would not meet tomorrow evening, and we would come back on Monday, June 16th. Are we clear then? So all those in favor, please raise your hand if you are in favor of the motion to only meet on June 16th. So as chair, I am determining that the motion ends debate for this evening, and the meeting is will
We
be
haven't
adjourned.
called for those opposed. I don't know if any are opposed, Madam Chair.
Sorry, those opposed to the motion to defer to June 16th. Why? Okay.
Because you've changed the ruling.
But you can't vote twice.
I must have voted twice. We'll have to vote again.
Redo it.
I have other questions.
So the chair has made a decision that the motion to defer to June 16th will end discussion this evening. So we'll put forward the vote again. The motion is to defer, to end the meeting tonight and defer to Monday, June 16th. All those, and tomorrow's evening's meeting is canceled. All of those in favor? And all those opposed? So the motion has failed. So we will continue meeting tomorrow evening, and we will also meet as scheduled on June 16th.
Okay.
And you can go now speak as a third-time speaker, Trustee Lyra.
Okay. So I have questions about projected enrollment. My concern is that our projected enrollment is going to go, so let's go with two things. If our projected enrollment is undercounting and we end up going up significantly, are we going to end up in a situation come September where we do not have the staff that we need to hire? Like what happens in the event that we have projected under?
Through you, Chair, it's not something that is normally not a problem to add teachers. It's usually a problem when we have to get into a reduction situation. So I don't see our enrollment numbers changing significantly to the point where we would be in that situation. It would be more likely the opposite situation where we don't get the enrollment that we had, and we might have to make further reductions based on who shows up on the NC Tower.
Yeah, that was my second question, was about what happens if we do not get the numbers that we have projected. I have heard from members of the community that the way we have chosen to staff some of our schools, where the number of projected enrollment that we have at that school has more than the maximum number of students allowed in the grade. So for example, we have a class of 27 projected with one teacher, and we know that's over the ministry cap. And I'm getting emails from people saying, this is too high, we're going to leave if you don't do something about this. And our district has chosen not to do anything about it. And because of this, I'm concerned that we are over projecting our enrollment. And I'm wondering what happens if we come to September and we are down 500 kids or 1,000 kids. So we've been wrong quite a number of times recently by quite a margin.
Through you, Chair, I think we'll do what we always do. We'll adjust based on what happens in September. I will say we have a history of having a lower enrollment in September, and then by the time October, November, and December rolls around, we do tend to retain greater enrollment share than we see in September. There's a variety of reasons for that we've talked about at previous meetings. But if we were down, and in fact, we've been down 1,000 before and made up 700-800 over the course of September to November, December. So I think we would have to pivot. I'd be surprised that families would know their enrollment numbers now. There's no way for teachers, schools, or anybody to know what their enrollment numbers are going to be in September today. There might be some forecasts there based on registration. We have situations that some children are requesting to move based on what's going on with EPR and where they might want to be. There's so many factors in what class sizes will be in September. I think it would be premature for us to put too much faith in any of our current forecasts. I think we need to get to September and then work through that. That's what revised estimates is for as well. It will give us an opportunity to adjust where we need to based on our whatever our enrollment numbers are.
Okay. I guess what I'm saying is what I'm hearing from my community is that we are over projecting because what we are choosing to do is going to cost us enrollment. And I don't know if you want to consider that a heads up. I don't know if you want to consider that in your projections, but it is what I'm hearing from my community about decisions that the district has made. I also have a question about the summer learning program. What would it take to not give up the summer learning program until we have that community partner in place to bridge the gap? So you had said that there were people in preliminary talks with the district about providing something akin to the summer learning program. What would it cost to run the program in the next fiscal year until we can bridge that gap?
Through you, Chair, the amount for the summer learning program, 610,500, I think is the financial allocation. I do not have another offset to run the program. I think I mentioned that we're taking a little bit of risk with the $3 million where we're going to be exercising hiring practices and deferred expenditures where required just to pass this balanced budget. So if the recommendation from the board here would be to retain the summer learning program, it would put us in a deficit situation.
Is there no ability to retain the summer learning program and look for $3.65 million in savings over the next year? Did you really cap out at $3 million as the absolute most you think you can find mid-year?
Through you, Chair, I think $3 million is the most amount of risk that we should take in this budget. As I mentioned, as you mentioned, there's some enrollment considerations that could fluctuate. We've been taking risk too long, and we've tried to fund the areas that we've taken risk in, OT replacement costs, WSIB, but there's still risk in this budget, and as the CFO, I would be comfortable assuming more risk at this point in time.
So earlier in my rounds of questions, one of the things that I asked was why $3 million? And you did not use the word risk when you answered that question. Could you expand a little bit more on how this is a risk to the district?
Like you mentioned when we were talking about the $3 million, what happens if we don't get the attrition that we were expecting to get? And I said, well, we've historically gotten that attrition, and we've gotten it the last 2 years, but it's still a risk factor to that. Now, would I be able to pivot on that risk factor? Absolutely, I might be able to pivot on that risk factor as the year goes on. It gives us a chance to do trends analysis on different things like OT replacement costs and different segments of the program. We could have talks about whether or not there's some things that we could delay or not do. I think it would be premature for us to try to find those savings now. We couldn't find those savings when we sat down for months to find more additional savings, but that doesn't mean if we were in an emergency or a crisis situation that we couldn't find additional savings. But to add more program to the budget right now would absolutely be risk. I think that what we've identified there is a reasonable amount of risk with historical precedents that we've been able to cover that. But going any deeper, I think would be wrong thing to do.
I see. I will, come Monday, I suppose, be putting a motion to maintain the summer learning program for a year on the information that we have received about the bridging and the possibility for someone to come in and pick up that program, but not in the time frame that we are looking at. I will, when I have had a chance to go through the numbers in more detail, figure out exactly where I'm going to recommend that money come from.
Thank you, Trustee Lyra. So we'll go to first-time community members. Annie, you're next.
McWitch, Randy, you have a difficult job, and I appreciate all the hard work your team has done. It's just more of a statement so everybody is understanding of my position, because I'm Indigenous and I sit on the Indigenous Education Advisory Council. I also sit on equity. And we don't have meetings in June, which therefore, how am I supposed to review the budget? Because, well, I'm lucky because I sit here and I can review the budget, but the committees can't. So there's one problem. The second problem is that you have a $1.24 billion budget and the Indigenous Department gets 0.0021%. So if you ever want Indigenous graduations rates to go up, you may want to think about figuring out a way to increase that funding. That's my concern because, well, we only average about 60 to 65% graduation rates, which is only 30% roughly below the provincial average. So from an equity perspective, I know it's a hard year. I totally get it. But I don't ever see this problem going away. And I really need you to look at, from a revenue stream, figuring out how to maximize Indigenous perspectives of how to generate more funds for the Indigenous team. That's what I would like. Thank you.
Thank you. And we'll go to you, Mr. Glover.
This is more of a statement to echo what Amy says. This is for Trustee Bell as well as for the Board of Trustees. Sitting on the advisory committees, there has been an appetite to have June meetings. And case in point, at June meeting, we would have been able to get you the info that you needed, Trustee Bell. So I'm just advocating with any next year, you may want to consider, since there are meetings, multiple meetings going right up until the middle to the end of June, of having advisory meetings, maybe not at the end of the month, but maybe in the middle of the month for issues like this when you do need advice or input from the advisory committees. And apparently this has not been a problem just this year. I know last year as well, there's been appetite to have a June meeting, but because of staffing, resources, budgets, they're not possible. So I'm just bringing this to the floor now, considering Trustee Bell's comment on input from the advisory committee. Me and Annie were disappointed because, you know, this would have been an opportunity to take this back to the group, and you guys would have gotten valuable insights from the advisory committees. So thank you very much. I know that we represent the advisory committees. However, there are times where we want to make sure that our voices are consistent. We hear everybody's voices and come to consensus and bring it to the table, opposed to giving our own personal views, which may not be the views of the committee as a whole. So I'm just bringing that for information and consideration for next year.
Thank you, Mr. Glover. And Trustee Dixon?
Through you, Chair, I'd like to echo the same as Indy, Jason, and Trustee Bell. I think it's really, the budget is a little bit different, and I know we have to have a balanced budget, but we seem to be overlooking the underserved, and especially, you know, with graduation and the numbers that are still coming forward. And even when we look at the human rights, this is the second year we talk about human rights. We had human rights that came forth last year, gave us recommendation. I still don't know what happened with those recommendations and where we're at with that. So it's really a little bit disappointing to see where we're at, and especially when both committees, at least 3 different committees, have been asking to be able to come forward with recommendation, and we never really listened. So again, I do support what we do have to have a balanced budget, but it's really disappointing that we still have gaps that we haven't looked at, and we keep saying we're looking at that. And even when we look at our, you know, what we have on, you know, equity, human rights, and diversity, and we seem to be forgotten about that. And I don't know if that's just what's happening all over, but it's really disappointing.
Thank you, Trustee Dixon. Are there any other, Ms. Rabb?
Thanks. I've been struggling, and the the question about whether to meet tomorrow and to move to Monday, there was a sense of panic that arose in me. I'm not sure what it is that I was hoping for in terms of debate and in terms of questions. And this document, I need the folks around the table are going to be able to do lots of explaining in the next few days in terms of what some of the areas that I'm less familiar with mean to students and to families and to members. I specifically represent secondary occasional teachers, and that's a group of people who recruitment and retention is particularly significant for. They don't have a pension. They don't have security year to year. And so the view of that pension is different. Their benefits, if they're a long-term occasional, they can put in quickly. But to a degree, there's a disposability and a connection that really needs to be made. And when I look at the proposals here, you look at 1/2 of a principal at the secondary level being cut. And if that happens to be the principal that's able to go into the class that is really struggling that day, that affects the member very, very clearly and affects whether they're going to come back tomorrow and whether they're going to encourage their friends to go to Teachers College and to enter the profession and to stay. But maybe their principal is one that stays. Like it's impossible for us, like this needs to be a philosophical conversation as much as we can't quantify what each of these cuts are going to do to any particular student or any particular staff member on any particular day. Every single one of these cuts is something that we thought was necessary last year and we thought was necessary the year before and probably would be a very, very good thing to be keeping. We were told at the last meeting that there wasn't going to be a buffet of cuts for trustees to pick from. And so I think that affects the debate and it affects the questions because there isn't a let's do this or let's do that. At some point, I'll leave. Again, I'm struggling in terms of what the debate and what the questions should be, because the whole thing, we're not going to get a solution that people are feeling at the end. This was good.
Thank you, Ms. Robb. So there are no more, there's no other speakers on the list. So at this point then, Trustee Lyra.
Now I would like to move a motion to cancel the meeting on June 11th.
So according to General Counsel, that is not, we're not able to cancel a meeting tomorrow evening. So your motion is not, is overruled
As being out of order. Okay. What words would you like me to use to not have a meeting tomorrow and come back on Monday? Like,
So the motion can be to defer the matter to June 16th.
great. I would like to move to defer the motion to June 16th.
All right, the motion is on the floor. All those in favor of canceling tomorrow's evening's meeting to defer it to June 16th. All those in favor. Is that 5? All those opposed? Counting 5 and 5.
Sorry, my hands is up.
So the motion has failed because it's 5 and 5. I counted you, trustee Dixon.
Okay, thanks.
Okay, so the motion on the floor did not pass. And the motion that the original motion by trustee Lee will continue discussion tomorrow night. So the meeting is now adjourned. Is recessed until tomorrow evening.